Welcome, restless souls, to Carmen's Crypt. I'm Carmen Carrion, keeper of forgotten tales and curator of nightmares. You've wandered into my domain, where each week I unearth a fresh horror from the depths of human imagination. In these darkened halls, stories wait like hungry shadows. Each tale we've collected whispers of terrors both ancient and new. From crumbling mansions where something skitters behind the walls, to that strange text message you received at 3 a.m. from a number that shouldn't exist. So gather close. The candles are lit, the shadows grow long, and the witching hour is upon us. Are you prepared to face what lurks in the darkest recesses of Carmen's Crypt? Lock your doors, still your nerves, and remember, here, every fear comes to life. This is Carmen's Crypt. Your sanctuary of scares awaits. A folktale from the year 2525. Long ago, in the time of our great-great-grandparents, there lived a young man named Kai in the great city towers of Old Metro. In those days, people carried magical windows called screens that showed them visions of distant places and other people's lives. These screens glowed with enchanted light that could show you anything your heart desired, games that never ended, stories that played themselves, and endless streams of faces and voices from across the world. Kai loved his screens more than anything else. He had the large window screen that covered his wall, the hand screen he carried everywhere, the wrist screen that never left his arm, and the eye screens that sat upon his face. From the moment he woke until deep into the night, Kai stared into these glowing windows, watching the endless dance of lights and colors. His mother would call him to meals, but Kai would wave her away, his eyes never leaving the screens. "Just 5 more minutes," he would say. But 5 minutes became hours, and hours became days. His friends invited him to walk in the old green spaces, to feel the sun on his face, to climb the ancient oak trees that still grew between the tower buildings. But Kai refused. "Why would I need trees?" he laughed, "when I could see forests from 1,000 worlds on my screens? Why walk in one garden when I can visit every garden there ever was?" The old people in his tower would shake their heads and whisper warnings about the screen eater, but Kai thought these were just foolish stories told by those too old to understand the magic of the glowing windows. The elders told this tale. In the deepest caves beneath the city, where the great cables carried the light to all the screens, lived an ancient creature called the screen eater. It was said to be neither fully real nor fully dream, but something in between. A hunger given form. The screen eater had no body of its own, for it had long ago consumed its own flesh, while staring into the first screen ever made. Now it existed as pure want, pure craving, a hollow thing that fed on the life force of those who lost themselves in the glowing windows. It would come for those who stared too long, the elders said. First, it would eat their ability to see the real world clearly. Then it would consume their desire to touch, to taste, to smell anything that wasn't projected light. Finally, it would devour their souls entirely, leaving behind only empty husks that did nothing but stare and scroll and click forever and ever. But Kai laughed at these old stories. How could looking at beautiful, entertaining, educational screens be dangerous? The screens taught him things, connected him to people, gave him more experience in a single day than his ancestors had in entire lifetimes. As the seasons turned, Kai noticed that the sunlight coming through his windows began to hurt his eyes. The real world seemed dim and colorless compared to the vivid brightness of his screens. Food lost its taste. Everything seemed bland compared to the rich, endless variety of foods he could see prepared on his cooking shows and restaurant feeds. When his family spoke to him, Their voices sounded flat and slow compared to the quick, entertaining voices that chattered constantly from his screens. Real conversations required him to think of responses, to listen, to be present, while his screens offered endless streams of content that required nothing from him but passive consumption. His fingers grew thin and pale from constant tapping and swiping, while his legs grew weak from disuse. His back curved from hunching over his devices, and his neck stretched forward like a bird reaching for seeds, always craning toward the nearest screen. But these changes happened so gradually that Kai barely noticed. He was too busy watching the latest episode, the newest game update, the most recent post from his feeds. One night, as Kai sat surrounded by all his glowing windows, the wall screen showing a movie, the hand screen scrolling through pictures, the wrist screen buzzing with notifications, the eye screens overlaying information on everything he looked at, he noticed something strange. His reflection had begun to appear in all the screens at once, but it looked wrong. In the screens, his reflection had no color, like it had been drained of all life. And behind his colorless reflection, something else was moving. At first, it looked like just another video, another stream of content. But then, Kai realized that this thing was looking back at him. It had his face, but his face as it might be if all the joy and curiosity and life had been sucked out of it. The thing in the screens had hollow eyes that reflected the glow of infinite windows, and when it opened its mouth, instead of teeth, there were tiny screens showing even more screens. Screens all the way down into darkness. "I've been waiting for you," the screen eater said with Kai's own voice. "You've been feeding me for so long, offering me little tastes of your attention, your time, your life. Now I'm strong enough to take the rest." Kai tried to look away, but found he couldn't. His neck had grown so accustomed to facing screens that it would no longer turn. He tried to close his eyes, but his eyelids had forgotten how to shut. They stayed open, held wide by muscles that had been trained never to miss a moment of content. Now you will see nothing but screens, forever. You wanted to experience every story, every game, every video ever made. Now you will experience only me, consuming you, until you become part of the endless feed. The screen eater began to pull Kai into the screens, not his body. That stayed in his chair, growing thinner and paler, but his essence, his soul, his life force was drawn through his eyes into the glowing windows. Inside the screens, Kai found himself in an endless maze of content. Every video he had ever watched played simultaneously. Every game he had ever played demanded his attention at once. Every social feed he had ever scrolled through updated faster than he could read. He ran through corridors made of moving pictures, climbed stairs built from stacked notifications, swam through rivers of streaming data. But no matter how much he consumed, he was always hungry for more. The screen eater had infected him with its own endless appetite. Days passed, then weeks. Kai's body sat motionless in his chair, his fingers occasionally twitching to scroll or tap at empty air. His family brought him food, but he couldn't taste it. They spoke to him, but he couldn't hear them over the constant noise of the digital maze in his head. Kai's grandmother, the oldest person in the tower, was a keeper of the old stories. Her own grandmother had told her tales of the time before screens were everywhere, when people looked at each other's faces instead of looking at windows, when they told stories with their own voices instead of watching endless videos. These memories had been passed down through the generations like precious treasures. She came to Kai's room and saw him trapped in his chair, his eyes reflecting the light of his screens but seeing nothing real. She knew the old ways, the old words that had power before the screens came. "Kai," she said, and her voice cut through the digital noise like a blade. "Remember the taste of strawberries. Remember the feeling of rain on your skin. Remember the sound of your mother singing you to sleep when you were small." At first, Kai couldn't hear her, but she kept speaking, reminding him of sensations that couldn't be captured on screens. The smell of bread baking, the feeling of sand between his toes, the warmth of a hug from someone who loved him. Slowly, these memories began to burn through the digital maze. The screen eater shrieked as Kai remembered what it felt like to be fully alive in the real world, to experience things directly instead of through glowing windows. With tremendous effort, Kai began to remember himself. He remembered that he had a body, not just eyes for consuming content. He remembered that he could create things with his hands, not just tap and swipe. He remembered that other people were real, not just sources of entertainment. The more he remembered, the weaker the screen eater became. It had no power over someone who truly wanted to live in the real world, who valued direct experience over endless consumption. Kai pulled his attention away from all his screens at once. It was the hardest thing he had ever done, like tearing away part of himself. But when he finally managed to look at his grandmother's real face instead of a screen, the spell was broken. The screen eater let out a wail of hunger and rage, then vanished back into the depths of the digital realm, to wait for the next person who would choose screens over reality. Kai learned to use his screens as tools, rather than letting them use him as food. He set times when all the screens would go dark, when he would walk in the gardens, eat meals with his family, and remember what it felt like to be fully present in the real world. He became a teacher, warning others about the screen eater. He would tell children, "The glowing screens are powerful magic, but they are meant to serve you, not consume you. If you find yourself unable to look away, if the real world begins to seem dim and flavorless, if you start to prefer the company of screens to the company of people, beware. The screen eater is growing strong on your life force." And the children would ask, "How do we stay safe?" And Kai would answer, "Remember that you have a body, not just eyes. Remember that you can create, not just consume. Remember that other people are real and precious, not just sources of content. Set aside time each day when all the screens go dark, and learn to be comfortable in that darkness. Learn to see the magic in the world that needs no windows to display it." To this day, 500 years later, parents tell their children the story of Kai and the screen eater. When a child spends too long staring at their learning screens or entertainment windows, the parents will say, "Remember the screen eater, little one. It grows strong on the life force of those who forget the real world. Touch the bark of a tree. Taste your food slowly. Look into your friend's eyes when they speak to you. Feel the wind on your face. These things cannot be captured in any screen, and they are the things that keep your soul your own." And sometimes, late at night, when the city is quiet and all the screens have gone dark, people say you can still hear the screen eater in the deep places beneath the towers, waiting patiently for someone to forget that the real world is more magical than any window, no matter how bright it glows. Thus ends the tale of the screen eater, as told by the fire speakers and wisdom keepers, passed down from grandparent to grandchild, so that none may forget the danger of feeding one's life to the glowing windows. Today's story was sent in by Chase from Tulsa, Oklahoma. Thank you, Chase, for adding your story to Carmen's Crypt. And so, dear listeners, we emerge from another dark corner of Carmen's Crypt. But remember, the horrors you've heard tonight are merely echoes of the terrors that await in the shadows of your own mind. If you enjoyed your stay in the crypt, why not invite a friend to join us next week? After all, fear is best when shared. Leave a review if you dare, or share your own tales of terror on my social media. Who knows, your nightmares might just become my next story. Until next time, keep checking under your bed. And remember, in Carmen's crypt, every fear comes alive, and no one is truly safe. Sweet dreams, if you can still sleep at all.